Things they didn't know about spiritual life. So the main book we study here is Bhagavad Gita. Is there anyone who is not familiar with Bhagavad Gita? Everybody knows some Bhagavad Gita. So Krishna in Bhagavad Gita is the guru, and he's also the Supreme Lord who has appeared in human society for enlightening people. And he wants everybody to be happy, and he talks about 4 different kinds of happiness in Bhagavad Gita. So I thought I'd just go through those so we can think about our strategies for being happy. And the strategies, we encounter these actually on the streets of New York. You can find people participating in all these 4 kinds of happiness. So in the second chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna makes the point that every living creature is a spiritual soul that's different from the body. And that as souls we're eternal, we existed before this body, we exist after this body. And as souls we're supposed to be experiencing spiritual joy at every moment. But because we're conditioned by a particular material body and a particular what's called subtle body or mentality, we're not experiencing joy at every moment. Actually, many people experience depression and anxiety, different diseases of the mind, and some people are tortured by such things for many years. And so the question is, how is it that we're dominated by this material energy, and can we get beyond the material energy to experience our spiritual happiness? So everyone is born into this world conditioned by this material energy, except for a few saints who are personally sent by the Lord Himself to enlighten people, which most of us aren't, unfortunately. So we experience different kinds of material miseries. So this material nature that's acting upon us has three different flavors, like sort of like the three colors. Actually, we have these screens. We have 16 million colors, which are 256 shades of blue, 256 shades of green, and 256 shades of yellow, and you get 16 million colors. So in the same way, there's these three qualities of material nature: goodness, passion, ignorance. Goodness, sattva in Sanskrit; passion, rajas in Sanskrit; and ignorance, tamas. And we're all conditioned by different combinations of these three qualities, and therefore we have different personal likes and dislikes and different abilities and all kinds of things based on the particular mixture of material qualities we have, which we've acquired due to our activities in a previous life. So people are born with a certain mentality. Sometimes people are born with amazing talents. Somebody said that Ravi Shankar played the sitar for 7 births. I don't know how authoritative that is, but I think he would be pretty good at it. He probably didn't have to take a lot of lessons in the beginning. He just had all this natural talent. But it's described that this period we're living in, there's 4 ages according to the Vedic cosmology. There's the age of goodness, Satya Yuga, where everything is, or the age of truth, where everyone is influenced by the mode of goodness. Everyone is expert at meditation. Their minds are peaceful. They see all creatures as equal and have respect for everything and everyone. And then the next and like 100% of people are like spiritually realized. Then the next age, a lack of spirituality is introduced materialism, and 25% of the people are affected by materialism, but there's still 75% that are into spiritual things. And each age, it's gradually, things get worse until this age, which is Kali Yuga, Kali means quarrel. This is the age of quarrel. And it's not hard to understand. There's a website called warsintheworld.com. And there's all these dozens of wars, big or small, going on the planet. People are fighting over this or that. And now there's these 2 major wars, the war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East. And not even that, you don't even have to go abroad to find wars. Even you can find arguments even on practically every time I ride the subway, there's somebody arguing with somebody about something. In this particular age is the lowest quality of material nature. Ignorance is prominent, and therefore there's all kinds of anomalies. Very little interest in spiritual life. One of my service is to chant Hare Krishna in public with my friends in different parts of the city, mostly now in Times Square subway station, because it's protected from the elements and it's very crowded. You meet many people. But we see that the people are actually curious about what we're offering as very small compared to the total number of people, which is consistent with the description of the age of Kali, where most people are pursuing material path. So as with these 3 material qualities, there's happiness in these qualities. There's happiness in the mode of ignorance, there's happiness in the mode of passion, and there's happiness in the mode of goodness. And there's 3 different chapters of Bhagavad Gita where Krishna describes these 3 material qualities and how they affect us, how they affect our diet, how they affect how we think and how we act, and like this. So in the 18th chapter, there's a section where he talks about happiness and these different material qualities. O best of the Bharatas, now please hear from me about the 3 kinds of happiness by which the conditioned soul enjoys and by which he sometimes comes to the end of all distress. So I decided I would start. Krishna starts with the best one first, but I wanted things to get better and better until they got to the best at the end. So I'm going to start with the worst one first, which is happiness in the mode of ignorance. Yad agre chano bande cha sukham mohanam atmana nidralase pramadotam tamasamudortam. And that happiness which is blind to self-realization, which is delusion from beginning to end, and which arises from sleep, laziness, and illusion, is said to be of the nature of ignorance. So Prabhupada has a little purport about that. One who takes pleasure in laziness and in sleep is certainly in the mode of darkness, and one who has no idea of how to act and how not to act is also in the mode of ignorance. Reminds me of, I met, there's some people in the subway station that they don't realize that it's good to take a bath. So actually they never take a bath. You can actually smell them a good distance away. And I'd never really encountered that before I came to New York before. So I was passing out this free literature and suddenly this terrible smell arose. I looked around and there was somebody. Yeah. So one of the qualities of goodness is cleanliness. And the opposite, the thing about the mode of darkness is it's just opposite of the mode of enlightenment. So because the quality of goodness is cleanliness, the absence of cleanliness is the quality of ignorance. So he continues, there's no happiness in the beginning or at the end. For a person in the mode of passion, there may be some kind of ephemeral happiness in the beginning and distress, but for the person in the mode of ignorance, there's only distress both in the beginning and the end. So one example is, meat eating is happiness in the mode of ignorance, in the mode of darkness, because it's based on causing violence to living creatures. So according to the spiritual knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, everything alive is a soul of equal value, and we can live perfectly well, and in fact better, on a vegetarian diet. And many scriptures, not only the Vedic scriptures, advocate a vegetarian diet. For example, even in the Judeo-Christian tradition, in the book of Genesis, the diet that God recommends is completely vegetarian. So there's suffering in the beginning, killing the animals, butchering the animals, like that, and then you eat the animal food, and different things happen. You're because of the animal fat, your arteries get clogged up, and you get all these heart diseases, and because our intestines are actually long like the herbivores and not short like the carnivores. So the things that don't actually completely digest, they rot and they cause toxins that give people cancer of the colon. So the people that are meat eaters, they get more cancer in the colon. And those are just some of the material side effects from meat eating. Actually, it's said the meat industry actually is worse, or the greenhouse gases, the gases that promote the destruction of the ozone layer and the global warming. The meat industry is worse than the transportation industry, which is actually inconceivable. So there's actually so many negative things from this meat eating, individually and collectively, but people are under illusion. I just walked past a place where they were bragging about their meat that they didn't use, what are the things they inject in the animals to make them grow fat and all these different things. Their meat is better than the average. So, and then happiness through violence is another thing. This war in the Middle East, there is some people on on both sides we think it's perfectly all right to kill innocent people on the other side because they're right and these people are wrong, and to blow up innocent people who have a different point of view is perfectly okay. But there's no scripture on the planet that allows the killing of innocent people. Thou shalt not kill is in every scripture. So they're in complete illusion to think they're going to advance their cause by killing innocent people. It's like basically it's like organized terrorism, you know. But there's actually there's an example in our tradition of somebody who had a very violent mentality. There was this animal, this hunter who killed these animals, and he would instead of killing them completely, he would just wound them, you know. And when the saint was asking him why he left the animals wounded, he said, "My dear saintly person, my name is Murgari, enemy of the animals. My father taught me to kill them in that way. When I see half-killed animals suffer, I feel great pleasure." So that's happiness in the mode of ignorance. When you derive pleasure from the pain caused to others, or pain caused to yourself. Intoxication is another example of happiness in the mode of ignorance. My guru writes about his youth before he became a devotee, and he was talking about this disc jockey he used to hear in the 40s and 50s, and because I proofread his books, I have to look up all these names to make sure they spelled them right. So I noticed this guy died at the age of 45, which is sort of young for somebody to die. He was very successful in the field, so he was written up in Wikipedia, so he was a famous guy. But he had a drinking problem and basically just died of cirrhosis of the liver at age 45. So he's thinking that he's enjoying by drinking this alcohol, but it's rotting out his brain cells, his kidneys, and finally destroyed his liver and psh. So the happiness that's comes from actually destroying our vehicle of survival in this world, our mature body. That's.
What was the name of the group he was in? If you don't mind asking.
He was a New York disc jockey. I could look him up for you later, but I don't remember the name. In the 40s or 50s, and gambling is another happiness in the mode of ignorance, because everyone thinks they're going to win, and they'll have all this money and they can do all these things they wanted to do. But the gambling houses, right? They set up the odds, right, so that they'll win, right? If the gambling houses didn't win, they'd go out of business and nobody would get in the business of running casinos, right? It's all set up so that the odds are against you. But the people are so illusioned they go for it anyway.
Maharaj, I think the entire Mahabharata war shows us the outcome of gambling, right?
Oh yeah. And it also shows that like the Duryodhana, who was up on the opposite side of Arjuna, he had a program of trying to burn his cousins alive and to strip the wife of his cousins naked in a government assembly. These people weren't fit for public office. If they were American rulers, they would have been impeached a long time ago and convicted and thrown out, you know. So, but Arjuna was such a nice guy; he didn't want to kill his cousins. So Krishna had to like rile him up, you know, to do justice to these people who should never have been in power in the first place.
It shows sometimes we have to go against our own kin just to stand on the side of righteousness.
Yeah. So that's it. But their behavior of Duryodhana, the antagonist, who fighting Arjuna, was completely in the mode of ignorance. They were thinking they could advance their cause by causing harm to others. So then the next higher level is happiness in the mode of passion. Vishyendya samyogad yatad agrim topam parnam eva shamiva tatsukam raja samsmritam. That happiness which is derived from contact of the senses with their objects, and which appears like nectar at first, but poison at the end, is said to be of the nature of passion. So there's all kinds of things that, kinds of sensual pleasure that people aspire for. And the example used by Srila Prabhupada in the purport is male-female relationships. People enter into these relationships thinking they'll find great pleasure, but often they don't find the pleasure they want, and they actually end up suffering more than they ever believed they ever would. And Prabhupada sort of describes that sort of graphically for a few sentences. And I gave this lecture in the Czech Republic several years ago, and I had the Czech translator read that description, and it was so heavy that when one young couple just walked out, because it was blasting their vision of happiness too much. And so I'm not going to read it. But you can.
Come on, we're
No!
in New York.
You can read it yourself.
Where can I find that?
Yes.
The excerpt. Where can I find that again?
Oh yeah, it's the purport to 1838 Bhagavad Gita. So if you can read it on your own. But there's other happiness in the mode of passion. People striving for wealth, that's in the mode of passion. People striving for power. People striving for control over others. People striving for possessions. That's all in the mode of passion. And this society more or less teaches that people are successful if they advance in these ways, but because the soul is completely non-material, no material asset can actually give pleasure to the soul. And I think how George Harrison was a good example. He had wealth, he had fame, he had popularity, he could have any female partner he wanted to because of his assets. He had a musical ability, talent, but he wasn't completely satisfied. And he got into, through Indian music, he got into Indian spirituality, and he got into, he actually had a meeting. We have a book called Chant and Be Happy, which is the meeting, tells about the meeting of our leader, Srila Prabhupada, and John Lennon and George Harrison, because they were into meditation and they talk about chanting. And George Harrison ended up really assimilating a lot of knowledge of Bhagavad Gita, popularizing the chanting. He made the chanting of Hare Krishna a 45 single that made the top 10 in many countries in Europe. And he actually donated, we have a book called Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He donated $19,000 to printing that book. And he bought a very nice property about 45 minutes northwest of London, a manor house and a lot of acreage, because he was appreciative of Srila Prabhupada's teachings. So he realized that by acting in the mode of passion, one actually can't satisfy the soul. There's something beyond. So then, happiness in the mode of goodness is described. That which in the beginning may be like poison, but at the end is like nectar, and which awakens one to self-realization, is said to be happiness in the mode of goodness. And Prabhupada writes, in the pursuit of self-realization, one has to follow many rules and regulations to control the mind and senses, and to concentrate the mind on the self. All these procedures are very difficult, bitter like poison, but if one is successful in following regulations and comes to the transcendental position, he begins to drink real nectar and he enjoys life. So the idea is we're used to unrestricted sensual enjoyment, but that gets us more absorbed in the material energy. And the problem with becoming more absorbed in the material energy, when we identify more with the body, and then our body is subjected to miseries that we cannot escape. Actually, the Vedic knowledge is very systematic. There's the threefold miseries and there's the fourfold miseries. And none of these miseries we can escape. They're miseries based on the body. So the more we strive for sensual pleasure, the more we enjoy sensual pleasure, the more we identify ourselves with the body. And then when the inevitable miseries of the body come, then the more we suffer. So we're actually cheating ourselves by endeavoring on the material plane. Yes?
What do you do if you got sick? You have chronic illness.
Right.
What are you supposed to do then?
Well, there's all those different spiritual practices that you can perform even if you're disabled in different physical or mental, even spiritual ways. So you can perform some spiritual activities, and you can increase your identification with your spiritual self, and that will decrease your identification with the body. So although you may still have the bodily issue, you won't suffer from it as much because you're not as much identified with it. And if you can actually persevere in your spiritual practice to attain the highest stage, you'll be so spiritually satisfied and experience that spiritual joy that the chronic physical situation is negligible, which is actually hard to imagine.
I've been doing it for like 2 years, and I'm like still like suffering.
Oh yeah. Well,
And it's hard to be here right now because like the lights are so stimulating for me, and I'm like in fatigue right now.
Wow. Yeah. These bodies, they're subjecting us to all varieties, and the mind also, all varieties of suffering. I won't find fault with you if you close your eyes if it's better for you, or if you cover them up with something. But 2 years of practice may seem like a long time, and it's longer than 1 year or 1 month. But to attain like a level where you're completely detached from all material identification, it takes generally longer than that, except for a few people who are highly advanced from a previous life, or who have an incredible determination to practice, which most of us aren't so fortunate. I can speak for myself. But the more we perform the spiritual activities such as prayer, meditation, chanting, like that, the more we identify with our spiritual self, and the less these threefold and fourfold miseries will feel real to us. There's a nice verse in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is like a sequel to Bhagavad Gita. It goes, Anartha Pashamam Shakshad Bhakti Yoga Madhoksate Lokasya Janatovirangs Chakri Sapada Samitam. That the material miseries of the living being, which are superfluous to him, which are actually beyond and have nothing to do with him, can be directly mitigated by the linking process of devotional service, bhakti yoga. And therefore the learned Vyasadeva compiled this great literature, Srimad Bhagavatam, the sequel to Bhagavad Gita, which is relationship to the Supreme Truth. So it's described that happiness in the mode of goodness, there's a little suffering in the beginning because we have to control our sense, we have to give up habits that aren't good for us. But if we actually are studying this, then we actually experience more of the pleasure of the soul coming through. Let's see. And Prabhupada in the purport there explains a little how that happens. A conditional soul tries to enjoy material happiness again and again, thus he chews the chewed. But sometimes in the course of such enjoyment, he becomes relieved from material entanglement by association with the great soul. In other words, the conditioned soul is always engaged in some kind of sense gratification, but when he understands by good association that it's only a repetition of the same thing, and he's awakened to his real Krishna consciousness, he's sometimes relieved from such repetitive so-called happiness. So basically the happiness of sense enjoyment doesn't get better, basically. At worst, it's the same thing again and again. But we're actually looking for something that's getting better and better. And on the spiritual plane, there is better and better, because the more our soul becomes purified, the more we can appreciate spiritual activities and our spiritual identity. So those are the 3 kinds of material happiness. But there's transcendental happiness. And it was described that the mode of ignorance was like poison in the beginning and poison at the end. And passion was like nectar at the beginning and and poison at the end. And goodness was like poison in the beginning and nectar in the end. But what everybody wants is something that's nectar in the beginning and nectar in the end. So Krishna describes this devotional practice as sukham. Sukham means happy, and su means very. So very happy. Kirtan, performed, very happily performed, in avyayam, everlasting. I'm going to describe the transcendental happiness. There's different references in the Bhagavad Gita and other literatures to the happiness of the spiritual state. This is from Bhagavad Gita. Such a liberated person is not attracted to material sense pleasure or external objects, but is always entranced, enjoying the pleasure within. In this way, the self-realized person enjoys unlimited happiness, for he concentrates on the Supreme. So this is enlightening us to the fact that there's another kind of pleasure. There's pleasure within. And this pleasure within can be attained by concentrating on the Supreme. So this is the clue that Krishna is giving us here. There's another kind of pleasure. It's pleasure within, and it's attainable by concentrating on the Supreme. There's another nice verse. It's in the Gita, but it's not from the Gita. It's from another book called the Padma Purana. And what I like about it is it's a definition of Ram. And in this this mantra we chant Hare Krishna, Hare Rama, or Hare Rama. But we don't always know exactly what Rama means. So this defines it. It's from another related Vedic literature called the Padma Purana. Ramante yogino nante satyananda chiratmani iti Rama padena so pram brahma vidiyate. The mystics. You want to be a mystic. Mystic, that's a translation he gave for the word yogi. The mystics derive unlimited transcendental pleasures from the absolute truth. And therefore, with the supreme absolute truth, the personality of Godhead is also known as Rama. So if somebody comes up to you and asks you what Rama means, now you know. The mystics derive unlimited transcendental pleasures from the absolute truth, and therefore the supreme absolute truth, personality of God, is also known as Rama. So, by connecting with this Rama, we can experience this transcendental pleasure. And our main practice for connecting with Rama is chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And the more we absorb ourselves in the mantra, the more we can attain the spiritual plane, and the more we can become detached from the material plane, and detached from the three kinds of happiness which everyone is experimenting with, but which aren't actually giving the ultimate satisfaction. Now, in the those were from the 5th chapter in Bhagavad Gita. In the 6th chapter, Krishna gets more into describing this transcendental happiness. In the stage of perfection called transfer samadhi, when the mind is completely restrained from material mental activities by practice of yoga. So like sometimes our mind are experiencing depression, sometimes our mind are experiencing anxiety. But this practice of yoga can get us beyond these material mental activities. This perfection is characterized by one's ability to see the self by the pure mind and to relish and rejoice in the self. So we actually have a transcendental spiritual nature, and that can actually be perceived. We can't perceive it with our material senses, but by this practice of the yoga we can actually experience it. In that joyous state, one is situated in boundless transcendental happiness, realized through transcendental senses. Established thus, one never departs from the truth. So everyone's looking for a happiness that doesn't come to an end. So this is what's being described here. It's a boundless transcendental happiness, and it doesn't come to an end. Being situated in such a position, one is never shaken, even in the midst of greatest difficulty. So the greatest difficulty really is the time of death, when we're separated from everything we know and love, everything we've cultivated an attachment for, including our very dear body, for so many years. All of a sudden, we're separated. Like if somebody loses their car, that's a shock. Or if they lose their house, or if they lose their computer even, or phone, actually. That's probably more common. Everyone loses their phone, right? I lost one phone myself. At any rate, but then, at the time of death, you lose your phone, you lose your house, you lose your car, you lose all your friends, all your relatives, everything you lose. So, but if one is actually spiritually situated, one will understand that he's going to continue to exist, and his relationship with the Supreme Being, who's the source of his origin and who's the cause of his pleasure, will continue to exist, and that actually everything is all right in a spiritual sense. Being situated in such a position, one's never shaken even in the midst of the greatest difficulty. This is indeed is actual freedom from all miseries arising from material contact. And then a few verses later he continues, the yogi whose mind is fixed on me verily attains the highest perfection of transcendental happiness. He's beyond the mode of passion. He realizes his qualitative identity with the Supreme. He is freed from reactions to past deeds. So if you ever wanted to become free from your karma, that's just a side effect of this spiritual practice. Thus the self-controlled yogi, constantly engaged in yoga practice, becomes free from all material contamination and achieves the highest stage of perfect happiness in transcendental loving service to the Lord. So, that's from the Bhagavad Gita. There's other places this happiness is described. In the Srimad Bhagavatam it said, since time immemorial, all transcendentalists rendering devotional service to Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead, with great delight, because such devotional service is enlivening to the self. And this is Krishna. We have in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna speaking to his disciple and friend Arjuna. So in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there's many, many chapters where Krishna is speaking to his friend Uddhava. And in this conversation, Krishna says to Uddhava, O learned Uddhava, those who fix their consciousness on me, giving up all material desires, share with me a happiness that cannot possibly be experienced by those engaged in sense gratification. So we have a happiness in relationship with Krishna that we basically have to give up everything to attain, but it's actually worth it because it's something that's everlasting and it actually completely satisfies ourselves. And then from the Nectar of Devotion, how many you have read Nectar of Devotion here? Okay. Nectar of Devotion is an amazing book. If you read the Bhagavad Gita, the next book I would recommend reading is the Nectar of Devotion, because it tells how to basically apply the instructions of Bhagavad Gita in your life. It tells about 64 different kinds of devotional activities you can do to spiritualize your life. It tells about different relationships you can have with God and different emotions you can experience in those relationships. And it's just an amazing book. I've read it like 10 times, and I'm still, when I get to the end, I go back and read it again because it's very enlivening. And it gives you some clue to the extent. When there's many religions, they talk about love of God, but how the extent at which that love can be experienced, I mean, that's like revealed in a big way in this Nectar of Devotion. Like who knows about the 6 kinds of smiling in love of God? You know, it's very detailed. So this talks about this transcendental happiness that is a result of perfecting one's devotional service. Rupa Goswami says that if Brahmananda, or the happiness of becoming one with the Supreme, is multiplied by 1 trillion-fold, it still cannot compare to an atomic fraction of the happiness derived from the ocean of devotional service. So I didn't make a distinction, but there's 2 kinds of spiritual happiness. One is to understand that oneself is different from the body and to be situated in that spiritual consciousness. And another is to experience the relationship between your individual spirit and the Supreme Spirit. So Rupa Goswami is saying that devotional relationship gives so much pleasure that the pleasure that you realize by understanding you're not your body, and your spiritual being is just a tiny, tiny fragment of the devotional pleasure of connecting with the Supreme Being through yoga. In the Hari Bhakti Siddharoya, Prahlad Maharaj, while satisfying Lord Nrsingadev by his prayers, says, "My dear Lord of the universe, I'm feeling transcendental pleasure in your presence and have become merged in the ocean of happiness. I now consider the happiness of Brahmananda, realizing one's spiritual nature, to be no more than water, and the impression left by a hoof print of a calf in the earth compared to this ocean of bliss." Similarly, in the Bharata Deepika, Sridhar Swami's commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam, he says, "My dear lords, some of the fortunate persons who are swimming in the ocean of your nectar of devotion and who are relishing the nectar of the narration of your pastimes certainly know ecstasies which immediately minimize the value of the happiness derived from religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. Such transcendental devotee regards any kind of happiness other than devotional service as no better than straw in the street." So the idea is that these people who are writing this, they actually experience this kind of happiness and realize that it's better than any kind of happiness in existence, and they want other people to know about it, so they write about it in their books, and they encourage people to attain it. And therefore it's important to be aware that that we're spiritual beings, and there really is spiritual pleasure, and it makes all material pleasures seem really small time. And I want to stop here to see if anybody has any questions or comments about anything that I said from these amazing literatures from India that have been translated by our teacher Srila Prabhupada, which he encouraged us to read and share. Does anybody have any questions or comments? Or yes?
I have a comment actually. It's really it just came to me. There was this guy named Keefy D, who was, if anybody's familiar with it, like hip hop and stuff like that. He's recently incarcerated for the murder of Tupac. There was an interview on a social media site where he basically was bragging about the night that they, assaulted the car, and when he says about the four kinds of happiness and the happiness of committing violence and stuff, I just think about that, like, you pretty much got away with it, but you're having to talk about it and brag about it. And he made the comment of when Tupac jumped in the back of the car, it looked like he was breakdancing. But it's like, are you laughing now, sitting in a jail cell, dying of cancer, being known as the guy that killed Tupac, a beloved rapper that, has transcended time, in the material world. So I was just thinking about that when you said that about, the happiness of violence.
Yeah, both violence and illusion go together, and these people who commit violence, they're completely oblivious to the law of karma. They don't know that if they kill somebody, as a result, they're going to be killed in this life, and if they're not killed in this life, they're going to be killed in the next life. So they're actually setting their own selves up for future suffering for themselves, and they're so illusioned that they're happy because they cause harm to others. So it's a complete perversion of the pure consciousness of the soul, where the highest developed consciousness of the soul, the person, like these people who wrote this literature, they take pleasure making the highest spiritual ecstasy available to the most people. Our teacher, he came from India on a boat at the age of 69, and he had 2 heart attacks, and it took him 38 days to come here, but he just wanted to share the height of India's spiritual wisdom with the greatest number of the people in the world, so that's the highest level of action and pure goodness, whereas on the opposite end of the continuum, there's people who take pleasure making other people miserable. Yes?
Oh, I had a comment on a topic that was brought up, just about, very quick comment, like you were saying, it can take longer than 2 years. It's different for every person, but there's definitely Vedic scripture that says 12 keeps coming up frequently in scripture, about 12 years of intensive sadhana, and you can get there, at least in the lineage I come from, that's brought up a lot of, if you're like wholeheartedly doing sadhana for 12 years, you could reach moksha, but it could take, in other scriptures, lifetimes, 9, 7, 2's brought up, 1 returner, all sorts of different.
It reminds me of one verse. Let's see if I can find it here. It's in the Srimad Bhagavatam, I think Canto 1, Chapter 6. So let me just look it up here. But it's it gives an indication about how long. There's also another reference in the Bhagavad Gita. I think it's Chapter 6 here. This is Krishna speaking to Narada before he became a great saint. In his previous life, he was practicing this very same kind of devotional yoga that we're teaching. And he wasn't perfect, but to encourage him, the Lord appeared and spoke to him. And he said, actually, you're not qualified. I can stay here with you, but I'm just appeared once to inspire you to continue. But he goes on to say, when he's speaking to Narada, he said, by service of the absolute truth, even for a few days, a devotee attains firm and fixed intelligence in me, and consequently he goes on to become my associate in the transcendental world after giving up the present deplorable material worlds. So there Krishna himself indicates that if you really focus for a few days, that'll make such a transformation in your consciousness that the rest of your life will be arranged in such a way you attain the spiritual destination.
Yeah, I've also heard like even if you chant one mantra in Kali Yuga, it's like chanting like 10,000 in Satya Yuga. There's such a current for you not to do anything spiritual in the collective consciousness.
Yeah, there's another reference that in the Kali Yuga that the good deeds that you think of doing, you get the benefit for doing them. So even if you can't get it to do anything, but you just think about doing all these devotional activities, you can make a lot of progress. There's another very amazing reference in the Bhagavad Gita, in the text number, in the purport to 272, where Srila Prabhupada says, one can attain Krishna consciousness or divine life at once, within a second. One may not attain such a state of life even after millions of births. It is only a matter of understanding and accepting the fact. Tatvanga Maharaj attained this state of life just a few minutes before death by surrendering unto Krishna. So, basically, the idea, the spiritual understanding is that as spiritual beings, we're part of the Supreme Being, part of Krishna. And therefore, our perfection is to act in relationship with Krishna. So if we can actually understand and act on that platform, if we understand that immediately and from the rest of our life we act on that platform, then we can attain perfection like in that moment. So yes?
Isn't it true that whatever spiritual level we attain in this life, we carry that to the next?
That's a very nice point.
And also, aren't you sometimes people born into super wealthy families, it's because they did attain a high level and now it's like a challenge?
You must be a Bhagavad Gita scholar.
No, I just read that in the Science of Self-Realization.
Yeah, it's a quote from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 6. I believe it's 40. 641. 641. Yeah, basically Krishna outlines a couple of different things that can happen. Let's see here. Basically Arjuna asks him the question, Almighty Armed Krishna, does not such a man who's bewildered from the path of transcendence fall away from both spiritual and material success and perish like a riven cloud with no position in any sphere? Krishna answers saying, transcendence engaged in auspicious activities does not meet with destruction either in this world or in the spiritual world. One who does good, my friend, is never overcome by evil. And then he explains two different outcomes. The unsuccessful yogi, after many births of enjoyment on the planets of the pious living entities, is born into a family of righteous people or in a family of rich aristocracy. And then, or if unsuccessful after a long practice of yoga, he takes birth in a family of transcendentalists who are surely great in wisdom. Certainly such a birth is rare in this world. So either you take birth in a family of spiritual practitioners or in a rich family, so you have time to actually inquire about spiritual things because you don't have to work hard, like just to survive, So, does anybody else have any questions? Or did you have more to say? Okay, yeah. Let's see, when are we supposed to end?
We can do kirtan in like 5 minutes.
Okay, so does anybody want to say, have any other questions or comments?
Well, I guess I'm a little curious.
Sure.
So the mode of goodness is not good? I got a little confused with that. Is the motive, because you said it starts with poison and ends with goodness?
Yeah, the reason it's described like that is because you have to perform a little austerity to situate yourself. Because we're habituated to unrestricted sensual enjoyment. But the path of, and therefore we're completely absorbed in our body. But if we're going to realize that we're not our body, we're going to have to control our senses. But because we're habituated for many, not just many years, but many lifetimes to unrestricted sensual enjoyment, to restrict our senses even in little ways, like to become vegetarian when you weren't, or to give up intoxication, when you're addicted to it, or things like that. It's austere in the beginning, so that's why it's saying it's like poison. But if
goodness in the end that's still the spiritual state, right?
Yeah, it's sort of goodness is the stepping stone to the spiritual state, basically. If you're situated in goodness, you have all the attributes that will propel you in a spiritual direction, basically. In goodness, you're truthful, you respect all living beings, you have a sense of the divine, you are willing to perform acts of a spiritual upliftment, you refrain from two activities that you know will entangle you in this world. You're situated in that state, and by continuing to act in that way, ultimately you attain the spiritual plane. So, the qualities of goodness are listed. Basically, they're the qualities of Brahmana, which goes Sama Dhammas Tapaso Cham. Sama is peacefulness, Dhamma is sense control, Tapas austerity, Socham is cleanliness. Shantir Arjavam Evacha. Shantir is like tolerance. Arjavam is honesty. Gyanavigatam Astikam. Theoretical spiritual knowledge, practical spiritual realization, and religiousness. These are the qualities which a Brahmana works, and they're the qualities of goodness. The Brahmanas are said to be situated in that mode of goodness, and then situated in that state of goodness. Actually, there's a nice verse. In addition to a book called The Nectar of Devotion, there's another ecstatic book called The Nectar of Instruction, written by the same person, and that's also another thing it's good to read after the Bhagavad Gita, because it has like 11 practical things you can do to spiritualize your life. And in the preface of that book, Prabhupada writes, in all spiritual affairs, one's first duty is to control his mind and senses. Unless one controls his mind and senses, one cannot make any advancement in spiritual life. Everyone within this material world is engrossed in the modes of passion and ignorance. One must promote himself to the platform of goodness, sattva guna, by following the instructions of Rupa Goswami, and then everything concerning how to make further progress will be revealed. So if we can just discipline ourselves to follow these regulations, to situate ourselves in goodness, then we'll get divine enlightenment from within, how to progress in a positive way. So I guess this is a good time to end. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for listening. I'm not a great speaker. I just quoted a few verses. We wish you all the best in your endeavor to control your senses and mind, and practice the devotional yoga, bhakti, and realize the highest transcendental happiness as soon as possible.
Just one more round of applause. So nice. Thank you so much. It's a very easy. It's very easy to trick ourselves into what we think is happiness, but sometimes that happiness is like it just goes so quickly. But whenever it's transcendental, I like what you said, that it's nectar in the beginning and it's nectar in the end, and that's what we're looking for.
Yeah, the singing and dancing is nectar in the beginning. The prasadam is nectar in the beginning.
Yeah.
It's nectar in the end. It just is more relishable. It gets better and better.
So this next part we'll do another kirtan. Normally we do a standing kirtan. And Krishna Kripa, would you like to lead us?
Sure.
Yeah?
In fact, is my instrument still lying around here?
Yeah.
I could use my instrument.
So everybody can stand up and we'll just move our seats over to the wall.
Sorry,